May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Gook Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Gook Audio and Gook Archives. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today, I'm going to read a piece written by Jerry Halpern that was inspired by the Beginner's Mind lecture. And by the last piece that we listened to and that I played last night, actually by the last part of it. Here, I'm just going to read you from that part. In Japanese art, when you master some art, you become the successor of your master, and then you'll receive some paper on which is written, no one knows what it is. It is very difficult to figure out what it is and to explain what it is. But if you have a beginner's mind, it's all right. Thank you very much. If you can say thank you very much from the bottom of your heart, that's all right. If you say, what is it? You have no secret. Just say thank you very much. That's enough. But this is very difficult. So by your practice, we must make our beginner's mind more and more. We should appreciate beginner's mind. This is the secret of practice, Zen practice. So, Jerry wrote me a while back and talked about that thank you very much in there. And, he said that wasn't it wasn't in Marion's Beginner's Mind, and it wasn't in Zen Mind Beginner's Mind, which came out of the Marion's transcriptions. So, well, let's go on and hear what Jerry has to say. Jerry and I were together at Tassajara, and he makes very thoughtful contributions to Gook Archives now and then. So, all right, here we go. I'm going to read you what Jerry wrote. But it has its own introduction because this is, I recorded this last night as part of the yesterday's podcast, and then when I was through, I went, no, this should be separate. This is commentary on that 7th clip. Now I'm going to read you a letter from Jerry Halpern about this. Jerry Halpern was sitting with Shunryu Suzuki, Danny Katagiri, Kogun Gino, and Steve Jobs and other people at the Los Altos Zendo. Job came later, after Suzuki. So Jerry came after this lecture was given. Jerry came, I think, 67. Jerry is another person that pays very close attention to things. And Jerry, way back then, this audio, one reason it's been getting so much attention now is because it's just been found. The audio tape was found at Zen Center. And Jerry listened to it while I was still at Los Altos, so in the early 70s. It was all the Los Altos tapes were lost, but 2 of them, and a few of them were just found, 2 or 3 of them. More, but most of them were somebody came and called and said they wanted to get them, and Les Gay gave them to him. And I think it was a woman, and nobody could remember who she was, and that's it. They're gone. I always wonder, why didn't they get him back then? I learned about it years later, and then I felt very guilty that I didn't. Because I first heard about this in like 15 years ago. No, longer. 23 years ago or something. And I felt guilty that I didn't get on it because maybe I could have followed some of the clues and found them. It's very strange, isn't it? But you know what? Going back to Philip Whalen's dictum that he said to me back in 1972 when he lived in the hall across from me at Page Street, and where I was bemoaning the destruction of the library at Nalanda in India. And of course, later I became more familiar with the destruction of the human beings by the invading Muslim hordes, the enormous amount of mass murder of monks, the destruction of art and writings and everything. So I was bemoaning that. And Philip said, "Oh, David, just enough survives." So that is the Kook Archives motto. All right. So, but anyway, too bad, huh? And it's fun trying to save everything just for fun because it's all going to be destroyed pretty soon. Remember, the description of archiving, the official Kook Archives description of archiving is preserving things a little bit longer, but only a little bit longer. All right, so I'm going to read Jerry Halpern's, what he wrote on it. It's pretty far out. It's pretty far out because he got hold of me months ago about this, but before Zen Center was making a deal out of it, right? And going on this awakening the archive thing, which is good because it's good for Zen Center to awaken to the fact that there's an archive. Thanks to Charlie Wilson and Shindo David Hay of Engage Wisdom. He got hold of me and to talk about this lecture and to talk about this part that was not included in the in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And to him, he said, "This is the part that has the thank you, you know." Anyway, let's hear what he has to say here. About Gassho and bowing, Jerry Halpern. It is well known that in Beginner's Mind, Suzuki Roshi is quoted as saying, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's, there are few." His unedited statement is, "In beginner's mind, we have many possibilities, but in expert mind, there is not much possibilities." It is not so well known, it was edited out of the version printed in Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, that in the same Teisho, Suzuki Roshi also said, if you can say thank you very much from the bottom of your heart, that's all right. Just you can say thank you very much, that's enough. But this is very difficult. When I was 10, I realized that I would die, and I could see no way to avoid death. In my life, in my studies at MIT, and in other contexts, I worked very hard. In retrospect, I believe that I was driven. I worked very hard. In retrospect, I believe that I was driven by an existential anxiety. I wanted certainty. I wanted to beat death. A view of Bridiville Falls in the spring of 1964 when I was 23. With this existential anxiety unexpectedly and abruptly stopped. For a while, I knew the truth, and I was free. Beauty is truth. Truth is beauty. That is all ye know on earth, and all you need to know. John Keats, Ode on a Grecian Urn. In the Bible, the name God is written as the Tetragrammaton Yud-He-Yav-He. The Tetragrammaton is unusual in that it combines the past, present, and future conjugations of the root into one word. The 13th century Buddhist monk Dogen wrote that to carry yourself forward and experience myriad things is delusion. That myriad things come forth and experience themselves is awakening. Dogen, Genjo Koan, Section 2. Over the next 3 years, I began to sit by myself, and then on February 14th, 1967, I met Suzuki Roshi when he spoke in Tresidder Union at Stanford. In the next year or so, I began going to Roshi's weekly teishos at Sokoji and sitting monthly one-day and multi-day sessions at Sokoji. Occasionally, I stayed a day or two at Tassajara. I was still a graduate student living close to Stanford and began to sit daily with Marion Derby at Haiku Zendo. Roshi, or Dining Katagiri, came to Haiku Zendo once a week. In late 1969 or early 1970, Kobunjino Otagawa returned from Japan and began living first at Marion's old home, which at the time had become Les K's home in Los Altos. Kobun had come to the U.S. in 1967, had lived principally at Tassajara, and returned to Japan for some time before coming again to the U.S. My focus and concern at this time was Zazen, not Buddhism. It was Zazen that I recognized as the essential aspect of what was experienced when I saw Bridavale Falls. But I made a common serious mistake. I maintained a gaining idea. I continuously judged my Zazen as to how near it was to reestablishing what I had experienced. I did not realize that, as Dogen says in Zazen Shin, the essential point that marks this investigation is the understanding that there is a practice of a Buddha that does not seek to make a Buddha. So without taking the backward step, he has that in quotes, I continued unconsciously in a judgmental, rigid, and coolly impartial, inhuman way, emphasizing just function. I moved to Tassajara in June 1970 and was there until about January 1973. A year or so later, Kobun visited. During a conversation with him, he tended to have informal dokusans, he told me that I should bow more. Why, I do not recall, but I was ready to accept that advice, and I began to practice it. The form this took was that I gasshoed to each person I met, whenever I met or passed someone, and very often gasshoed to objects, the temple bell, the han, ritual instruments, but also, for example, a broom before and after I swept with it. When I gasshoed to a person, I did it with full, true respect beyond any everyday relations we may have had. Of course, there were those at Tassajara with whom I shared negative relations, and there were others with whom I was friendly. That didn't matter. With complete respect and impartial goodwill, I gasshoed. A gassho, like any other gesture, can be manipulative, and perhaps some may have thought I was gasshoing with some such intention. But in fact, I was not. With full respect to each person and thing I gasshoed. When I began taking Kobun's advice to bow, there was inescapably some effect in my gasshos. But as my bowing practice continued, a quality of warmth began, and any personal affect became less and less. Years later, I read in the Lotus Sutra of the Bodhisattva, never disparaging. A year or so after I began this bowing practice, I felt changes that I associate with it. There was a sensation of warmth near my heart. Others seemed to have a much easier time speaking with me, and I with them. There was a feeling of satisfaction and beauty in, for example, sweeping the already well-swept paths the evening before the day off. I could feel confession, repentance, and gratitude, and the connections among them. Now, he ends this with two quotes. He doesn't say Shunryu Suzuki, but clearly they're quotes from Shunryu Suzuki. First, bowing is a very serious practice. Next, just you can say, thank you very much. That's enough. But this is very difficult. I would like to add to this, bowing is a very serious practice. That Suzuki could have just as easily said, when you bow, don't be too serious. But I've talked about this a number of times. Serious can have different meanings. So when he says it's a very serious practice, he means take it seriously. When you bow, do it with beginner's mind. That's taking it seriously. I thought it would be good to read this following the podcast that had this part of the beginner's mind lecture in it. At first, I made this to be part of that podcast, but by the time I was through reading, which is right now, I decided, no, I'm going to make this the podcast for the following evening, which is March 1st. So thanks a lot, Jerry. Thanks a lot, Shunryu Suzuki, for giving that lecture. And we'll be hearing more from both of you, I'm sure. This has been a Cuke Audio Podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sanur with Doghead Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.